pick up on the last lecture. So the last lecture kicked off with some introduction to Excel, and we left off with functions. So we're going to work with that sample one Excel spreadsheet. So let me bring that over. And I initialized this sheet a little bit with some random numbers. And so before I get into this part here where we talk about the more counting functions, let's take a look at how I generate this. So it's pretty straightforward, and we used a function called rand. So you might remember from what we were doing in JavaScript, the random number generator. So when we do these typing of functions within Excel, we start off with the equal, and then we do the rand, and you can see that Excel gives some helpful suggestions about functions that you can use and how to use them. So you can see here it says return random number number greater than or equal to 0 and less than 1. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'll use this, and because I want to get a range between 0 and 100, I'm just going to do the multiply of 100. And for people that have been doing this with JavaScript, you will be able to see the similarities here. Okay, and so let me just drag this out. You can see how easily we can make a whole matrix of dummy numbers here. Let me drag this across to the side also, and you have this. Okay, now the thing you have to be careful with here is like Excel is going to be recalculating periodically, so you don't want these to keep on generating new numbers. Well, sometimes maybe you do, but in this case we don't. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take this similar to what we did last time when we were talking about different ways you can do copy and paste. So I'm going to hit Control C, which highlights all of this for copy, and I'm just going to bring it down here, and you can see here, you can see the paste options. So I can copy it like this like basically the default. If I did a Control V, that's what it would do. If I do this, I'm only going to take the values, right? And in this case, I'm going to take the formulas, which is not what I want, right? So this is what I want. I want to take the values. So let's do that. Okay, and you see if I highlight here, there's no function, it's just the values. Okay, and let me take this, let me set the decimals on this. Let me go back to here and decrease the decimals. Okay, and then we're good. And so these are the numbers, and that's how I ended up with these numbers up here, which I did before this recording. So let me clear all this noise out. It clears it out here. So let's take a look at some of these guys here. So here it says count, right? So count is going to count the number of cells in a range that contain a number. So let me start typing that in. So count, you can see Excel again highlights this helpful information here. And to fill this in, I have to open paren. I'm going to take this and just highlight this range here. And then I'm going to do a close paren. Okay, and you can see what Excel does. It will, whenever you put the close paren, it'll hop over to the open paren so you can see where it matches. That's useful when you actually get into more complicated nesting of these functions. But let's put that like that. And it tells you 13. So there's 13 of these guys here. So let me put count here just for reference. Next function is count A function, which counts the number of non-empty cells in a range. All right, so let's try that. So equals count A, and let's pick that same range again here, and I close it off. Okay, so count A. The next one we have is count blank functions. This counts the number of empty cells in a range. So let's do that. So equals count blank range and close it off. So count blank, and here I have the count if. Okay, So the COUNTIF is a little bit interesting. It gets into a little bit more we're going to cover in a second in terms of conditional logic. So let's do count if, oops, I forgot the equal sign here. So equals count if, and so it counts the number of cells that meet a given condition. So let's try something here. Let's say we're going to do the same range again. And then now we're on to the criteria. So I hit a comma there. What's the criteria we're going to look for? Let's say we want everything that looks to be greater than 50. And then we'll close that off, and that gives us 6. Okay, so count if looks like that. All right, so let's just play with this to see if these things will recalc when we change them. Let me change this. I'm going to put a space in here. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens when I did that space. So here for the count, it dropped by 1. Okay, obviously when I look through this range, I have 1 less of a number here. But interesting enough, when I look at the count A, where it says it counts the number of non-empty cells, you would think that should go down to 12 also. And the reason why it didn't is because I put a space in here. It looks like there's nothing in there, but the fact that you have a space in there counts as something. So I would hit a clear content, and that brings us to 12. Okay, so that's something that's a little bit tricky if you're counting on something to be empty, and it looks like it's empty, but in reality it's not. You'll have some unexpected results. And likewise, you look at the count blank, that goes up. All right, so in case that you missed that from before, let me hit a space here, and you can see the count blank is at 0. Okay, so let me clear that again. Oops. Clear contents, and we're back up again. And here, the conditional logic, obviously we took out one of the higher numbers here, so that dropped down a little bit. Okay, let me put a number back in here. Let's put 66. And you can see the COUNTIF went back up again. All right, so all is expected. So let me highlight all of these guys here, and let me drag the numbers over, and you can see by doing that drag, all of the relative cell references updated as you would expect. It kept on moving across. If you didn't want that to happen, then you would have put $signs at the cells, right? So you remember you can anchor these both on the vertical and the horizontal, right? Depends on what you want to do. But in this case, we actually do want all of the references to update based on us moving to new columns, and you want these calcs to change along with that. So that's what we have here. So let's move on. All right, so these are just counting examples, and that's pretty much what we did here. Okay, you can try these on your own. You can just set up your own grid of random numbers and try different Excel functions on them. This will probably play out a bit when you look at your Excel homework assignments. Okay, so now we're more of the conditional logic, which I alluded to before. So we're going to go back to, you remember this little inventory table that we had before. We had some prices and quantities. We calculated a discount on them. We added some tax onto it, and now you have a total due. Now what you want to do is we want to factor out, calculate the shipping. So here you can see what we're doing. If H6, it will be a different one here, it will be actually H2 over here, is greater than 50, then we're going to set this cell to be $10 for shipping. Otherwise, we're going to ship it to be, we're going to set it to be $5 for shipping. So let's see what we get here. So equals if, and I'm going to say H2, and if it's 50, the true condition, we're going to make it 10. If it's not true, then it's going to be 5. Then I do a close paren. and you can see it became $10. Okay, because $64 is greater than 50. Let's copy that down, and there you go. All right, let me just add this in here for shipping, and we're good to go. So these you can prove out the formula yourself. You can see that it matches up and plays out as you would expect. Okay. All right, so now we're on to a different set of things, and I set up another table here. So this matches up to here. So we have a banana, Big Mac, and Snickers. You have a little bit of information about each of those products here, which matches up to here. Okay, again, we're going to use some conditional logic. So in this case, we're going to look at the and. So this is what I was talking about before. We're going to nest a function within a function. Right? Here's the if function now here. Then within that, you're going to have this and. And what it does is you're going to have any number of these to evaluate to true for the whole thing to be evaluated to true. And then we'll hit this part. Otherwise, you're going to hit this part here. So let's try that. Equals if, open, and then we're going to do and you can see as we're filling this in, you can see Excel is giving you some helpful information here. Right, and so what's the first thing we want to check? Right, so we're going to check if this guy is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so the next thing we're going to check is this one, and is that greater than 20? And then one more check, we're going to check if this one is less than 20. Now I'm going to close paren, and you're going to see it's going to highlight the paren, the open paren next to the and, just like so. All right. So now we're into the part where we're going to set the value of this based on it being true. All right. In this case, we want to say not bad. Else, if it's false, we're going to say bad. Okay, and then we're going to close paren, and it goes back to the if, and we're all done. All right, so it says not bad. All right, and if you go through each of these, you'll see that each of these have evaluated to true, so that's why the whole thing under and evaluates to true. And that's why under the if function, you end up with this not bad part. Otherwise, you would have ended up in bad. So let me drag this down, and you're here. So in this case, we have bad, basically because this one right here, this was not less than 20. If this was less than 20, then you would be good. But the fat being over 20 is what caused this to come out to be bad. Okay. So let's just match up here. We can say diet. Okay. So the next one, you have this if, and then similar type of thing, but now you're going to use a not. Okay. So the not is going to basically reverse whatever happens in here. Right. So if this is true, then the whole thing becomes false. And if this is false, the whole thing becomes true. Right. So let's see what happens. So equals if. Okay, now I have a not. Then we have an open paren. So in this case, the C8 was the second column. So that's this guy here. And if it's greater than 50, close paren. And then we're going to do low. And then we're going to do high. And then close paren. Okay. All right, so that evaluates the high. Okay, so again, this was higher than 50. It's at 51. So that's going to be true. Okay, but then when you apply the not to it, this not right here, you made it false. And by you making it false, That's how come we ended up on this side here with the high. Okay, so let's drag this down, and both of these evaluated to low. Okay, so we're working on this column and this row, or this cell, I should say, this cell, that cell. So same thing, you can see we copy relative cell reference again, and in both cases, because they evaluated to be less than 50, 47 and 34.5 in this case, they were false, and then the not flipped it around and became true. And that's how you got to this point right here. Okay, so let's see. All right, so here we're doing like some charts, right? So pie charts here. Okay, so let's see if we can do some of that here. Okay, so in this case, we got the Big Mac, right? And then we're gonna come across with the Big Mac. So I highlight all of these guys, and I'm gonna do insert, and then I come over here to the pie chart. Okay, and let's just pick this right here. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways you can play around with this, and Excel gives you some handy things to try out. So you have different layouts. So let's see what happens when I click out this layout 2, right? And so if I click on layout 2, it pretty much matches up to what we have on the PowerPoint here. Okay, but yeah, I can play around with it different ways. So it just basically shows different information, and obviously there's all kinds of different combinations, color schemes, whatever. You can play with them at your leisure, but we're just doing this to match up to here. And I'm gonna just leave this on the side here, so when you guys pull it up, you can see it on your own. So I'm gonna be uploading this up to the upload site in Canvas. You guys will see that after I get done with this lecture. Okay. So here we have a different type of chart, basically like these bar graphs here, and basically it's taking the values going up like so. And we're gonna come back to this again. So let me move this down a little bit out of the way. And let's see what we're gonna do here. So we're gonna highlight this whole thing here. Just like that. And let's insert another chart. Okay, so now we got some bars. Actually, I want the columns here. I want the column charts. And we got that. Okay, let's look at the layouts again. Let's see what we can get here. And we selected layout 2, which matches up to what we have on the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's see what it highlights here. So you can see here, by us selecting the whole table, it was able to figure out to look at these guys here and these guys here to drive the range of values here. And it was able to default this. You can play around with it a little bit if you want. So if I go into design, you can see here I can do the switching, which I'm not going to do that, but let me look at the select data. So you can see this range here, which is referring to the sheet. You can see here sheet 1, and then you can see the range of data that it's playing with. So again, here's the switch here, but you can also go in here to do edit, where it says the label range is playing around with that. I can do this, which is down here. Okay, so you can play around and edit these as you want to play around with it. Lucky for us, this is a fairly standard table. So basically it picked up everything and filled it out in nicely for us. And you can see how it matches up for the carbs, the fat, and the protein on each of these products here. So it lays it out pretty nicely. So let me, oops, drag. Oh, let me undo that. One other thing I should mention, you can see this one right here. There's an option to move chart. All right, so if I did a move chart, what I can do is instead of leaving it here, maybe I want to move it to a new sheet, right? So maybe I go to here and I can say, let's say, food chart, okay? And you can see I created a new place to work it. So maybe sometimes I don't want to see the raw numbers and I want to just see the charts or results into a different tab here. So that's what I did by doing this move chart. Okay, in fact, I'm just going to leave this here and we'll come back to this. Okay, all right, so what do we got here? We go to the next one. All right, so some of these we did in the last lecture, right? So down here we have the accounting with a dollar sign. You can select multiple ranges. You have the cell styles button here. One thing we didn't do was we didn't do this merge and center. So let me do that for you up here. Let me do a insert. Okay, so now let's say we want to call this to be our retail inventory. Okay, so that's fine. We can have that up here. But with the idea of this merge and center, you see all these different cells here, but it's all part of the same table. And so I want this retail inventory to really be the title for this whole thing. So you have this right here. We can do a merge and center. There's a couple different ways to do it, but let me just do this. Okay, and you can see what it does. It gives you a little bit of example just below that. Let me just do that right now, and we're good. So all of these went away. It became just one giant cell here to cover this whole table, right? And I can come in here. Let's do this with it. Maybe I want to change the color. I want to match it to this other one here. We can jump up the size a little bit, maybe even more, I guess, like that. I should have an R capital, just like that. Okay. So I think that covers a lot of stuff that we also covered from the last class. So let's move up. Okay, so we did sorting from the last class also. So you remember the sorting. I went in here, I took this, and then I did the data, I did the filter on it, and any one of these guys, you can do some sorting on it. Okay. You got, oops. And you can do with this type of thing also, where you can select any one of these guys here. Okay. So a little bit more sophisticated instead of just working with these individuals here. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can do the sorting, but you can work with that. Okay. Okay, so this is just like some formatting type of stuff. We referred in the last lecture, we talked about relative versus absolute. So I'm not going to go too much into that just for the sake of time here. So this kind of highlights it a little bit here. You can see here with the F2, and then as we went all the way down, you can see the number kept on going all the way down. So it adjusts, that's relative. Okay, when you say absolute, it refers to the fixed position, right? And so it talks about the different cases. You remember what I was saying before? You can do absolute both on a column and a row. Okay, so if I leave it like this, the F2, that means everything is relative. When I do a copy of that, it's just going to keep on adjusting. If I do this, I just put a $ in front of the column. That keeps the column fixed, but the row will keep on changing if I do a copy on it. Likewise, I can do a $ in front of the row, but the column will keep on moving. That's why it's called relative column. If I just want both sides to be locked in, right, I'll put a $ in front of both of them. Okay. As I said, the last lecture, I kind of covered that a bit already. So I'm not going to do an example of that. Okay. So here we talked a bit about the functions, which I've covered already with some example. And yeah, so you remember the formulas tab, right, which basically lists a whole bunch of formulas that you can play around with here. And like I said, when you do the equals, if you can type in even the first letter of the formula, it starts to bring together suggestions on what type of formulas you can use. Right, and so this picture kind of shows the same thing here. Okay, so you can see here the control formulas. As I remember we talked about last class, you can also do the control tilde, and that will end up showing you the formulas also. Okay, and you can see up here, show formulas. All right, but let's back that out, and we're back to this. Okay, so you can see all of this. Sometimes it's useful, you can see all the formulas, and you can see if you had a typo somewhere, or something doesn't look quite right. So it's useful to be able to see all the formulas like that. Okay, and here. All right, so we talked about the if function, right? So logical test, the value of it's true, value of it's false, right? So right up here, that's the test. This is the true value, this is the false value. Okay. And here, you can see the application of that, right? So it's basically, and you can see this $ again, E dollar, the $E, $12 means this guy's 75. They're going to do all of the comparisons relative to this. This guy's going to stay fixed. So even if I copy all these down, it will stay E12 all the way. And then here, it's going to be relative. So it's going to follow along down here. And make sure that it's going to compare the right value each of these rows versus the 75. So if it falls below that 75 number for any of these guys here, it's going to tell you to go do an order. Okay. Wildcard usage. So it's right here. So you look at some of these type of things here. It's basically saying, okay, instead of me looking for a specific value, maybe I'm looking for some similar types of things. So in this case here, no matter how big the range is, I want to look for anything that starts off with VINE, so vine. So that's why it has this little star here, right? With this one, it's just basically saying star, try to pick up everything. So sometimes you'll use this wildcard to help you in terms of your searches on stuff. All right, so you remember this is a COUNTIF, which we did at the beginning of this lecture. Okay, so something that's very common here in Excel, which I want to try and hit within this lecture, so that's why I sped it up a little bit, is this VLOOKUP function. Okay, so what this VLOOKUP function does, it basically treats this part, let's say we're going to do this retail inventory, basically treats this almost like a little bit of a database or something. And so let's say I want to do a search on here for a particular item. Maybe I want to look for a scarf or something. And within that, I want to get any of these values out, right? So the idea is that whatever you're going to search for, let's say it's around here, we're going to probably sort the guy here. There's a couple gotchas for the VLOOKUP table. So we'll probably go through that at some other session, maybe during our actual lecture Q&A. We'll kind of cover some of the stuff for that. But for now, let's just say you're going to have these guys sorted here. We're going to be able to search on this for, let's say, a particular item. And then we're going to have the result of that come back for any of these columns here. Okay. So let me just do a demo here. So I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. Okay. So we're going to say, what's the lookup value? I'm going to look for a scarf, let's say. So I want the scarf. Okay. And what's the table we're going to look up? And so let me put a comma here just to get over to that. I'm going to highlight this just like so. And then the column index num. Okay. So whichever one of these that I find, I'm going to say which column do I want to bring back, right? And it starts off with 1 here, right? So this column here being 1, this is being 2, and all the way across. So let's say if I can find the scarf, I want to know what the price of it is. Forget about any discounting or anything like that. So let me say I want the column 2. I want column 2. And the other thing that I want to put in is false. Okay, I want exact match. There's a lot of unexpected behavior if you leave this blank or you put true there, which I'm not going to go into at this point. Just suffice to say right now, we're going to say we want to put false in here. So let me just put false here. Okay, and then let me do a close paren, and you can see 1995 came back, which is this guy right here. Okay, so that's a VLOOKUP, right? There's actually a number of tricky things we need to keep in mind with this. Like I said, I'm not going to cover in this lecture, but I just want to give you a quick introduction to how the VLOOKUP works. We'll probably maybe do more examples with VLOOKUP during the lecture. But I just want to show this to you for right now. And I'm going to take this out because I don't want this to be a part of the upload for you guys to work with. We'll deal more with this in class. So here, you can see what they've done with this VLOOKUP here. So they made it so that you can punch in the item number, right, off of this B11. Okay, and then whatever that item number is, it's going to pull back and show you what that item is. Okay, so that's one example of doing a VLOOKUP. It's just basically a lookup on a table. You can almost treat it as sort of like your database. Okay. The other thing we would look at as part of this is your PMT function. Just happens to be like one function. It's a common function. As you can see over here, we have a ton of different functions here. But this PMT function seems to be, I guess, a very common function. So maybe we'll just kind of go over that quickly. It's not much different than any of the others. Just maybe a quick little gotchas or whatever. Let me just move down here so we can have some space. And so the basic thing with this is there's a couple inputs into this function. So you would do equals and PMT like you do any other Excel function. This is the interest rate here, okay? And this is the periods. And then this is the, it says PV, essentially is your present value of whatever it is that you're, let's say, borrowing. So your principal, okay? So we'll just do a quick example here. All right, so you have this here. You can see the interest rate, you have the periods, and then you say the principal here, okay? So let's type this in here. So we got the equals, and then we got the PMT, and then we have the open, right? And as always, Excel is pretty helpful to kind of display these different guys here. We didn't talk about these and leave this out for now. So the first one is the rate. The thing to be careful with here is the rate is quoted as an annualized rate, right? So it's 10% interest rate. But the periods is basically every month, right? So what that means is that you have to take this 0.1, which is your 10%, and you have to divide it by 12, right? Because you're doing 12 monthly payments per year, okay? So you're converting that. And then do a comma. So now you need the number of periods. So the number of periods is 30. So let's type that in, okay? And then the last part is your PV or your principal. So in this case, it's 16,000. So let's do 16, 1, 2, 3. And then let's close this off with a closed paren. Okay? And you can see basically every month we're going to be paying out $604.98, right? And the red or the negative indicates us paying, right? It's a negative cash flow for us. And it highlights that here in the PowerPoint, you're paying out. Okay, so I went through that pretty quickly. I'll probably do a bit more of these during our lecture, but I'll just run it through quickly so you can see that. All right, and let me clear this guy out again, and clear contacts. Okay. All right, charts. We went over charts before. We have different types of chart options and layouts you can play around with. Please do that. Okay. Okay. So series fill, that's what I've been doing a lot of up here, where I would take something and you see like this little box thing or whatever in the lower right hand corner, and you drag that around, and then it automatically knows how to increment it. So if it's like for cell reference or whatever, if it's a relative cell reference, then it'll automatically increment those guys. But it shows you some other examples or two, not just with numbers. And so here it looks at days of the week, basically drags that along and knows how to roll the days of the week as you drag it down. You can see that little bottom right hand thing there. And that's pretty much it for these series of slides here. So during the lecture, I'll kind of go through these in more depth, but hopefully we've covered a lot of different topics here for the introduction to Excel. So we'll finish up and I'll see you guys in class. Thank you.